What shoes should I wear? Is the #1 question I get from our online audience and the thousands of hikers, skiers, and runners we've worked with all over the world. And my answer is usually not what people want to hear, which is I can't tell you. And not because there isn't an answer, but because it's so highly individualized. It depends on your goals, your training history, and what you've had on your feet for most of your life. Your footwear is how you interact with the external world every single step, every single day, and everyone's on their own journey and timeline. So I'm not here to tell you about the best hiking shoe of the year because that clickbait is already all over the internet. My aim is to share with you a practical framework and some real guidelines so you can make the best, most informed decision for yourself. Welcome back to Outdoor Adventure Training. My name is Mikey Bell, and this is our 3rd video in the Mountain Ankle series. If you haven't yet, make sure you check out the other 2 where we talked about how to assess your foot and ankle mobility, stability, and strength. And then in our 2nd video, we really got into how to actually improve your ankle and foot health for the long haul. So when it comes to footwear, particularly in the outdoor niche, there is so much nuance to discuss. And unfortunately, most of us in modern society have lived a life of traditional footwear, heavily cushioned, really stiff, often with a lot of heel lift. And we love to think about shoes in terms of comfort and style, but what most people don't realize is that footwear genuinely changes how your body moves, not just on the trail or in the mountains, but in everyday life. So let's start with one of the simplest variables. Does your shoe actually allow your foot to be a normal human foot? Your toes are supposed to spread naturally when you load them. And it's that splay that gives you balance and proprioception and feedback from the external world. But most shoes, whether they're street shoes or dress shoes, and even most athletic shoes, taper to a narrow point and squeeze all of the toes together. And it's easy to see upon visual inspection, the shape of the shoe oftentimes doesn't match the natural shape of a foot. Researchers have actually scanned hundreds of thousands of feet and concluded pretty much unanimously that toe boxes should be built to fit the actual shape of human toes because footwear will slowly reshape your foot over time. In one study tracking women's shoe choices across their lives, found that those who wore narrow, pointy shoes in their 20s were about 2.5 times more likely to develop a bunion than women who wore wider shoes. Giving your foot a little bit more room to move around in your shoe isn't just going to prevent problems, it's actually going to help you build a stronger foot too. Studies on minimalist foot-shaped footwear shows real gains in the small intrinsic muscles that help stabilize and support your arch, anywhere from 9 to 57% across the research. So when you're shopping for your next pair of shoes, consider the shape of the shoe against the actual shape of your foot. And everybody's foot is different. I personally have a very wide foot, so I seek out wider footwear. And even when I'm forced into narrower footwear, like ski boots, I have a lot of work done to them to expand the shell to make sure it fits my foot. So the shape of your shoe is really about long-term foot health. If you already have bunions or tailor's bunion, also known as bunionette, a wider shoe isn't necessarily going to fix these problems, but it can help expedite that process and get you out of pain more quickly. At the end of the day, a foot that can splay naturally is a foot that will work better. The next hot topic is cushion, and this one's going to need a lot of research behind it because there's a lot of misinformation on both sides surrounding cushion in shoes. In the running and hiking world, people often assume that more cushion equals better, more protection, less impact, and more pain-free, comfortable miles. But think about physics for a second. Energy can't be created or destroyed. So a 2-inch slab of foam under your feet doesn't make that energy just disappear back into the universe. So where does it all go? If it's not dispersed and managed by your feet and ankles, it's just gonna go upstream to the next joints, your knees, your hips, and your spine. There's no way around impact. And there's a ton of research to support these claims. A 2018 study put runners in a highly cushioned maximalist shoe versus a more conventional one. And the cushioned shoe didn't soak up the impact, it actually amplified it. At a faster pace when they were running, the impact peak was about 11% higher and the loading rate about 12% higher. This is because your leg is forced to stiffen to compensate for the softness underfoot. But to be fair, because this gets oversold in both directions, cushion is not necessarily the enemy. A trial of more than 800 runners found softer, more cushioned shoes actually had lower injury rates because for a lot of people, that cushion lowers the loading rate. So the research can really be manipulated either way, and the question isn't, is cushion good or bad? It really comes down to how much you need depending on the objective and the terrain, your training history, the distance that you're planning to cover. We need to look at cushion as a tool and just be mindful of the dose and when we're utilizing that tool. But here's the other thing about cushion that a lot of people don't think about. It lifts you up off the ground. On one extreme, imagine walking on stilts. You lose proprioception, your balance suffers, and you lose pretty much all sense of what's underneath you. Then we flip to the other polar opposite. If you've ever walked barefoot through the woods, you know that very grounding feeling, and you move completely differently. Your gait changes because your foot is finally getting that real sensory information. And that's exactly why we love our Zero shoes. They're really flexible, lightweight, with that minimal cushion and support. So your feet can actually move and stabilize the way that they're meant to. And an added bonus, when you can get your whole foot grounded on the floor, you're gonna get better engagement through the entire kinetic chain. Most people know the cue of grounding your heels into the ground. And if you're wearing a lot of cushion or a heel lifted shoe, that cue goes out the window. You're gonna miss out on some of the gains of those exercises, and you're likely just better off working out barefoot. But there is a fine line when it comes to cushion. If you're moving over technical, sharp, rocky terrain, covering many, many miles, you need that cushion. Unless you were raised by a pack of wolves running barefoot in the mountains since the day you were born, you need that layer of protection. I'm not seeing anybody run and win ultramarathons barefoot, at least not in the races that I've run. When you're deep in the wilderness or moving off trail in rugged terrain, unprotected feet are going to take a beating. So we need to look at cushion strategically. There are times when a more minimalist barefoot shoe is ideal for what you're doing, and then other times you do need that extra support and cushion. We just need to be smart about when we choose to utilize these tools. The next major variable that most people aren't even aware of is heel to toe drop. Drop can be defined as the height difference between your heel and the toe inside of your shoe. It has nothing to do with the cushion of the shoe, but rather the angle at which your foot sits. Most of us have spent our entire lives with our heels lifted. Not just dress shoes, but also most street shoes and workout shoes usually carry at least a 10mm drop or more, lifting the heel up off the ground. That chronic lift shortens the calves and the Achilles tendon and takes the load off of them. But just like what we talked about with cushion, that load just doesn't magically disappear. It just moves up the kinetic chain again to your knees, hips, and spine. And when you look at the research, you can watch that load move up and down the body. With heel lifted shoes, there'll be more load in the knees, hips, and back. And then in a more zero drop or lower drop shoe, the ankles and feet take more of that load. But here's the part that trips people up. So let's be really clear. Although the heel toe drop might change where the load is in the body, the overall injury rates don't really change that much. The biggest trial on this took over 500 runners using 0 drop, 6mm, and 10mm drop shoes, found really no difference in overall injury rates. The only difference is where those injuries might occur. The part that does get underestimated is how small of a heel-toe drop can move that load through the body. A standard running shoe might have 12mm of drop, which is only about a half an inch. And 2mm is less than 1/10 of an inch, which is barely visible to the naked eye. And yet, even with just a 4mm shift, the research shows that this can change how the load lands in different places in your body. This isn't me trying to overcomplicate things with small measurements. I just want to demonstrate how sensitive these structures are to the angle at which you stand. So if you are interested in migrating to different footwear, you need to do it very slowly over time. But let's tie all of this back to the very first video in this series when we talked about range of motion, particularly with dorsiflexion of the ankle, and limited dorsiflexion being one of the biggest risk factors for developing plantar fasciitis. And if you're living in a heel lifted shoe, again, even just a few millimeters, over time, your body will adapt to that and those structures will become shorter and you will lose that ankle dorsiflexion. So switching to a 0 drop shoe is the obvious choice, right? You're more grounded, your foot is more neutral, it lengthens the calves and Achilles. And while they can be great, it comes with a real catch and you need to be careful. In one study, runners were taken through a slow, gradual transition to minimalist shoes over 10 weeks. And even then, more than half of them showed early bone stress in the foot. Some even picked up real stress injuries. And the researchers' conclusion was very blunt. If you're going to make this transition, you have to do it very slowly. So if you've spent 50 years or more in a heel lifted shoe, you cannot make this transition in just a few weeks. The real timeline should be at least a year or more to do this in a sustainable and injury-free way. Like I said in our last mountain ankles video, those structural changes happen slowly and we need to respect that. Here's the deal with footwear, and this should tie a lot of these loose ends together. Personally, I primarily live in 0 drop shoes, which was a transition I made over several years. But I'm not exclusively 0 drop. I keep a few shoes in my quiver that have about a 4mm drop to change up the stimulus. These are mostly for running and for my recovery slides around the house. And as far as cushion, I have some shoes that are more heavily cushioned for when I'm running ultra marathons or long days in the mountains. And I have more minimalist shoes for shorter efforts or training in the gym. So when your training load is high and you're really pushing it and spending a lot of time on your feet, mixing up the stimulus is exactly what your body needs. There's real research behind having a quiver of shoes. One study found that runners who rotated between several different shoes had about a 39% lower injury risk than those who just ran in one pair. Variety can help spread out the load instead of hammering the same systems day in and day out. Here's the reality of being a multi-sport athlete. I put my feet in some really uncomfortable environments for the sake of the activities that I love most. I spend a lot of time in ski boots, mountaineering boots, climbing shoes. None of these are good for your feet, but I'm sure as hell not going to miss an epic powder day because my ski boots lift my heel a little bit. And depending on the objective, you might need that stiffer sole or a little bit of that heel lift. If you're mountaineering and climbing big peaks, your crampons aren't going to do anything in a flexible shoe. You need that structure. You need that rigidity. And ultimately, footwear in those contexts is a tool and has a very specific function. So the real question isn't what's the one best shoe? It's across a day, a week, or a year, what are you putting your feet in? For me, that's everything from 0 drop casual sandals to minimalist camp sandals, zero drop trail running shoes, a little bit of heel lift in some of my trail running shoes, depending on the objective for that day. But the reality of it is, for me, I spend 250 hours a year in my ski boots and at least another 150 plus in my trail running shoes. So the real magic is what I do when I'm out of those shoes. It's the mobility work, it's the recovery, it's the strength work that help keep my feet healthy regardless of what I put them through. Really, the whole game is dosage and diversity, having different tools for different jobs, and then the skill within that is deciding which one to use, how often, and when. I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't at least touch on footbeds, because there's something I use in pretty much every outdoor adventure. For a long time, I was anti-support of any kind. I wanted strong, resilient feet that could handle anything I threw at them. No footbeds, no support, just bulletproof from the ground up. Then I got plantar fasciitis, and not only did I start looking for solutions through strength training and mobility work, I also found sole footbeds. A little bit of support when you're rebuilding and transitioning. Make sure you're not doing more damage in the process and that you can load the tissues enough to get stronger, but not so much that you're creating more problems along the way. And like we talked about in our previous mountain ankles video, a lot of people have weak ankles, struggle with overpronation and weak arches, and having that little bit of extra support can really help the foot from collapsing while you're building the strength on your own. Now, to be clear, a footbed isn't going to solve all of your problems, and neither will rolling out your foot, but combining all of these tools together can help get you out of pain so you can keep moving and you can keep training. I like to think about footbeds the same way I think about trekking poles on a big hike. Poles aren't a crutch. You still climb the mountain. You still put in the work yourself. The poles are just there to add a little bit of stability and support along the way. And footbeds serve the same function. We've been using sole footbeds for years, and we're super grateful to have partnered with them. They have this amazing sustainable cork material. They're super durable, very comfortable, and have that perfect out-of-the-box fit that we love. I have sole footbeds in pretty much every pair of footwear, with the exception of when I'm doing my strength work, when I want that natural foot support, but you will not catch me on a big trek or running an ultra marathon without those sole footbeds in my shoes. There's a link in the description below for $20 off your first order from Sole Footbeds. So that's the general framework. We want space for your toes to move. We need to be mindful of how much cushion we're using, and at least starting to be aware of that heel toe drop, and then understanding when it's appropriate to have a little bit of extra anatomical support. Just remember, a lot of these shoe companies are going to make all these claims how this shoe is going to fix all of your problems. And trust me, it's not. You need to put in the work. There's no quick fix. Go back to our last video in the Mountain Ankle series where we show dozens of different exercises and methods that you can utilize right now to start improving the mobility, stability, and strength in your feet and ankles, and then using footwear and footbeds as tools to help expedite that process so you can have better, longer adventures in the mountains. That's what we're all about here at OAT. Make sure you check out our Mountain Ankles program. We have a ton of amazing free resources for you there as well to support you on this journey. And as always, thank you so much for being a part of the OAT community. Leave us a comment. We love all of your amazing questions. We will answer every single one of them, and we will definitely be seeing you out on the trail.